Have you ever wondered why consistency feels impossible? You've tried building habits, setting goals, and pushing yourself harder, yet something always pulls you back. You blame laziness, you blame lack of discipline, you blame distractions. But what if the real reason runs much deeper? What if there's a hidden psychological rule operating in the background of your mind that no one ever taught you? This rule governs every system in your life, silently determining whether you succeed or fail. It's called the law of identity reinforcement, and once you understand it, everything about habits, motivation, and long-term change begins to look completely different. Most people believe in a simple cause-and-effect relationship. Behavior creates identity. This is the conventional wisdom we've been fed. The logic sounds straightforward. Once I succeed, I will feel confident. Once I wake up early consistently, I will become disciplined. Once I build momentum, I will become the type of person who does hard things. We assume that repeated actions eventually transform us into the kind of person we want to be, but psychology suggests something radically different. The reverse is actually stronger. Identity doesn't emerge from behavior, identity creates behavior. And here's the critical part: identity isn't built from big wins or dramatic transformations. It's built from the repetition of small proofs. Your brain is constantly working, quietly collecting evidence about who you are. This isn't a conscious process. It happens automatically, beneath your awareness. Every single action you take becomes a tiny vote in a larger election about your identity. Skip a workout and your brain silently records, "I am someone who skips when it is uncomfortable." Finish a task you promised yourself and it records, "I keep agreements with myself." These tiny recordings accumulate quietly over time, almost unnoticed. But they're accumulating nonetheless. Eventually, they form a stable narrative. That narrative becomes your identity. It becomes how you see yourself, and more importantly, how your brain predicts your future behavior. Here's where things get complicated and why staying consistent becomes so difficult. Once an identity forms, your brain works hard to protect it. One of the strongest forces in human behavior is something psychologists call cognitive consistency. Your brain desperately wants to maintain coherence between your beliefs about yourself and your actual behaviors. Think about this: if you believe you're bad at math, you will actively avoid math situations. If you believe you're not creative, you will unconsciously resist creative risks. Your brain doesn't do this consciously. It filters opportunities to preserve internal coherence. It prefers being consistent over being correct. In other words, your brain would rather keep you stuck than challenge your current identity, even if change would actually be better for you. This psychological trap explains why motivation fades so quickly, even when you start with the best intentions. Motivation relies on emotion, and emotions fluctuate. One day you feel pumped up and ready to change. The next day, that emotional energy has evaporated. Identity, on the other hand, relies on stability. Once your brain has formed a stable narrative about who you are, it resists change with surprising force. When you try to build a new habit without shifting your identity first, you create internal conflict. Your brain sees the new action as a threat to your existing self-definition, and it quietly pulls you back toward your old behavior. You feel resistance, you feel friction. You wonder why it's so hard, not realizing that your own identity is working against you. Consider someone who identifies as a night person. They've believed this about themselves for years, maybe decades. One day they decide to wake up early. They set an alarm, they commit to change, but every single morning they face enormous friction. Why? Because their internal model says, "This is not who I am a night person. This early morning thing doesn't fit my identity." But here's what's interesting: if that same person slowly gathers evidence that they can function in the morning, something shifts, not dramatically, not overnight, but subtly. The statement in their mind gradually shifts from "I am a night person" to "I can operate in the morning when needed." That tiny adjustment in how they see themselves reduces the resistance significantly. Suddenly, waking up early doesn't feel like fighting their identity anymore. It feels like an expression of who they actually are. This understanding reveals why small habits matter far more than dramatic changes. A single workout doesn't transform your body. It doesn't build muscle or burn significant calories, but it does something more important: it casts a vote. A single focused study session doesn't make you intelligent, but it reinforces the identity of someone who studies. Over time, the accumulation of small votes outweighs the old narrative. The votes pile up until the old story about who you are can no longer compete with the new evidence. Your brain says, "Remember how awful that felt? Let's not do that again." But if change feels manageable, almost boring, your brain doesn't activate its defense mechanisms. It accepts the update quietly. This is why the smallest version of a habit is often the most effective starting point. not because it produces big, impressive results, but because it produces believable identity shifts. 2 minutes of reading daily is easy to dismiss as insignificant, but it repeatedly confirms, I am someone who reads. Over months, that confirmation becomes stable. Once stable, expansion becomes natural rather than forced. Identity reinforcement also explains procrastination in a new way. When you delay a task, you're not only avoiding effort in that moment, you're reinforcing the identity of someone who delays discomfort. Each delay strengthens that narrative. Over time, the label becomes heavy. It's written into your self-concept. Breaking procrastination then requires not just taking action, but disrupting that identity. It requires gathering proof that you're someone who doesn't delay, despite the discomfort pulling at you. The same mechanism operates in reverse for confidence. Confidence isn't built from positive thinking alone, despite what self-help books tell you. True confidence emerges from consistent proof. Each completed action adds weight to the belief, I can handle this. Without proof, affirmations feel hollow. With proof, they feel obvious. Your brain trusts evidence more than wishes. Here's the quiet paradox that changes everything. You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your identity. Goals create direction, but identity creates repetition. And repetition shapes life more than direction ever could. This means lasting change requires designing actions that confirm the identity you want before you fully believe it, not pretending, not fantasizing. Actually acting in ways that are small enough to sustain, but strong enough to register. As evidence, over time your brain updates its model of who you are. The resistance weakens. What once required willpower becomes default, and when identity shifts, behavior follows automatically. Most people think transformation is dramatic. In reality, it is administrative. It's the steady collection of evidence filed daily in the background of the mind. It's boring, it's unglamorous. It's not the kind of story that sells books or gets shared on social media, but it's how real change actually happens. Once you see this truth, you stop asking yourself, how do I force myself to do this? You start asking a different question. What identity does this action reinforce? Because every choice you make is not just behavior, it is a vote. And eventually, the votes decide who you become. Have you ever wondered why consistency feels impossible? You've tried building habits, setting goals, and pushing yourself harder, yet something always pulls you back. You blame laziness, you blame lack of discipline, you blame distractions. But what if the real reason runs much deeper? What if there's a hidden psychological rule operating in the background of your mind that no one ever taught you? This rule governs every system in your life, silently determining whether you succeed or fail. It's called the law of identity reinforcement, and once you understand it, everything about habits, motivation, and long-term change begins to look completely different. Most people believe in a simple cause-and-effect relationship. Behavior creates identity. This is the conventional wisdom we've been fed. The logic sounds straightforward. Once I succeed, I will feel confident. Once I wake up early consistently, I will become disciplined. Once I build momentum, I will become the type of person who does hard things. We assume that repeated actions eventually transform us into the kind of person we want to be.